Thanks for finding us on No Stoplights. I want to thank our sponsor, as we always do, to begin with, McLeod PLC Commercial Real Estate, Pepsi of Florence, McCall Farms, MPD Electric Co-op, Victor's, Micky Finn's, Party Shop, Carolina Bank, Francis Marion University. As I like to redundantly say, and I'll never stop redundantly saying, none of this is possible without our community-minded sponsors. You call this clutter, I call this product placement. Wanted to make sure our sponsors know how appreciative we are of what we do here, whatever it is we do here at No Stoplights. We've been doing for the past, 5 or 6 months, a podcast with a group here that is a sponsor of our podcast, but very influential and important to our economy as we grow. Normally we talk about some of the tailwinds, some of the headwinds in commercial property in our state. I've asked these guys to agree to do something a little bit different. We don't pre-plan. We don't have production meetings beforehand, but I did get their permission in this particular podcast to kind of address something that I'm very interested, curious in, and I think you will be as well. John Etheridge and Ken Jackson from PLC Commercial are with us today. John, Ken, how are you?
Good.
So, and I don't have a signed contract, but both of you agreed that it was on fair game to kind of go down this road.
5 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, you're 5 minutes ago may change your mind. And if this thing doesn't produce an edit on time, you'll know why they didn't agree as previously arranged. But now I want to get your take on this, and I want to throw some numbers at the two of you to begin with. California's GDP is $3.6 trillion. Texas $2.4 trillion. New York, $2 trillion. Florida, $1.5 trillion. Illinois, $1 trillion. That's the only 5 states of the 50 that have a state GDP north of $1 trillion. South Carolina, I looked it up, 25th at about $300 billion. How exact is that? I don't know. A population is about 23rd in America, but there's no doubt, you guys know it better than I do, how fast our state is growing. 4.3456 million people have migrated from what I'll call historically densely populated areas to the Carolinas, Tennessee, Florida, and Texas. That'll have political consequences, but I want you guys to answer a hypothetical. And I'll throw some questions out, but I want you to consider, John, Ken, that if you were invited to the governor's mansion, and the objective was to figure out a way to prepare for the next wave of growth in South Carolina. And I'm talking about competitiveness, property tax reform, Act 388. Ken, John, you know what I'm talking about. The education. If we're 25th in American state GDP, and we anticipate and project ourselves to eventually be top 20, we're 23rd in population. We also project that to be in the top 20. What are some of the concerns you have? What is some of the advice you'd give to a governor of South Carolina if asked about how to prepare for the next wave of growth? Either one of you guys can start off with that. Not a specific question, but in generalities, what are some of the things you see out there we need to be paying attention to?
In my opinion, the top 2 things you got to address: education and infrastructure. I don't think we have the work sources here right now in certain parts of the country, and I know we don't have the infrastructure. I mean, if you look at North Carolina, what they've done, everybody has gone 95 and gone to North Carolina, immediately know where you're at. You've gone out of Georgia into South Carolina, you immediately know where you're at. I know that's federal stuff, and I know it's a combination, but we have to get our infrastructure in place, and looking at that is how the money gets broken down back through the state. Right now, it all goes to Columbia. No matter how many people go through Florence on 95 at Buc-ee's and pump gas, a large percentage of that goes back to Columbia, if I'm not mistaken, and then works its way back down. We've got to fix that so people can take care of their infrastructure so we can bring business here. And we got to have a workforce that is able to fulfill the higher income jobs, and also we can put administrative people in place in federal and local government, not federal, but state, county governments. We got to do that.
Ken, let's drill down on education. You're a board member, Francis Marion. They're a sponsor of the podcast. We're actually in the building that they own today. You've expressed your concern to me over the years at how we've got to get better at educating and providing an adequate workforce if we're inviting businesses to come to South Carolina. To John's point, what are some of the criteria we need to address in improvement of education?
Well, I think we need to make education accessible at the higher education level, and through our tech schools and keeping it affordable. I think, really the bigger issue we have here is in our K through 12 and, graduating students that are capable of going out in the workforce and providing, working in as being able to go to tech or trained to be an electrician or HVAC or service person kind of. I think, doing more to help our pre-K kind of education system to make that more accessible to people, to get kids in school as early as possible, so that they're not starting out behind. It's across the board. But just like John said, I don't disagree with education being a top priority along with infrastructure. But I also think there's some other things like the tax system. As the property tax system is unfair to commercial property owners.
But explain that in a way that our viewers and listeners can understand. You live it. The majority of them don't.
Well, commercial property is assessed at a higher rate than residential property, or owner-occupied residential property. It's assessed at 6% versus 4%. And what that means from a practical standpoint is that, between property taxes and insurance, you're paying between 2 and 3 months of your rental income for those two things. And you combine that with higher interest rates, and it's hard for people to invest money in commercial real estate and make the numbers work. And I think there needs to be some rebalancing of the structure of how commercial versus residential properties are taxed.
John, competitiveness. You agree with what Ken's saying here?
Yeah.
We got to get more competitive in the tax structure when we're competing against North Carolina and Alabama. I don't know what you guys do every single day, but I got to believe the phone rings occasionally, someone looking for a commercial property, but they're also looking in Georgia. They're also looking in North Carolina, and we are at a great disadvantage in competitiveness with our tax code.
Absolutely. And people say 2%. It's not really just 2%. When you do the math, however it's done, it's going to be a significant burden on the property owner. So I think we've got to address that, Ken said. And going back to education, I'm going back a little bit on your question, but we also got to figure out how in the state we retain the people that we need to retain. I know a lot of people go through these great programs we have, even public school, private school, whatever, but they don't come back to South Carolina. They go somewhere else, and now they're in Atlanta or they're in Tampa or wherever they're at, or even Charlotte or Greenville, which is good for us, but not so much in the PD, Raleigh. These are the places they're going. So how do we retain these young people? What incentive do we give them to make this state they're going to raise their family in?
Let me ask the two of you this. There's a population boom. We were talking at lunch about the number of houses being built around South Carolina. But that is once the people decide to call South Carolina home, you guys aren't in the residential property. You're more into commercial and industry and developing property for job creators. But the reality is, as people move to South Carolina, there's going to be a requirement of more grocery stores, more restaurants, more industries to provide X number of services. Are we ready? Are we? I don't want to say permitting property, but are we locating in and beginning to think about developing property at a rate that this population boom will require?
Well, usually it follows the rooftops. It doesn't happen before they get here. It happens after they get here. But, the things like the infrastructure are important that we could be planning for, whether that's adequate water, sewer, roads.
Zoning,
building codes, making it easier to get permits. So having all those things in place, knowing that it's coming, will save a lot of headaches down the road.
John, I don't want to be critical of anybody, but I will be. I'm not no. In all honesty, I think we were kind of believing for a generation or so that we were a slow, southern, sleepy state of about 3.5 million people. Somebody found the coast of South Carolina, and here they came. And we've been a bit slow in adjusting to accommodating that growth.
From Columbia to Horry County.
No question
about
that.
I think Greenville has been very aggressive during that time period, like we talked about earlier. I think,
Do you agree that Greenville was a bit unique in being visionary, thinking about accommodating the growth that would come?
Yes, I think they had an opportunity to have someone like Carol Campbell in the State House. I mean, as a governor who made sure they got the money they needed to make Greenville happen.
And
They had an opportunity.
being between Charlotte and Atlanta didn't hurt either.
And BMW decides to call home North American headquarters. That didn't.
Absolutely, but I mean, we've had the opportunities down here before and have missed out. I mean, for years we've missed.
So am I on to something when I say not bad people doing bad things, but a failure to understand that we're not that southern sleepy state of 3.5 million people. We are now a destination. Yes. I mean, and as people move to South Carolina, whether they're retirees or not, there's going to require a certain degree of economic development to go along with that.
I think there's no doubt, and if I understand your question, is that where we take it ourselves as we're just a slow part, just we're going to be farm, a little bit of agriculture.
Did we sit on our ass? I'm sorry, that's probably not appropriate here, but I mean, I'm a country boy, and that's the way I look at it.
Absolutely, we did. We did. I mean, if that was the case, if we didn't, every part of the county would have already been zoned. They had a plan in place to do it years, decades ago. They haven't got around to doing it yet. So, I mean,
North Carolina seems to have been a little more visionary, like the triangle and some of the other things in North Carolina seem to be developing faster than South Carolina.
But you would agree we can't plow a straight road looking back.
No.
I mean, we got to learn from what we didn't do between 3.5 and 5.5 million. But I'm telling you guys, and I think you'll agree with me, we'll do a podcast if we live long enough, and I'll tell you that South Carolina has 7 million people. Yeah. I mean, we're not going to stop being a destination, good weather, affordable living. I just think we've got to you guys have to involve yourself not as policymakers, but as lobbying policymakers, advocating for changes to make the state more competitive.
Yeah. Absolutely. State, county, and city. I mean, we have to do a better job of explaining what are the needs for people who are going to bring jobs here.
So why are people so afraid of zoning? When you say planning and zoning, I mean, I served at county council. I remember, Ken and I had a lot of conversation about it. Don't tell me what I can do with my property, but make sure they don't do that with theirs.
Not in my backyard.
I mean, okay, but let's go there. I mean, what sorts of things do we need to begin thinking about in your area of prominence? I mean, you guys do a lot of developing and speculating and deals around this area. How do you convince people to warm up to planning and zoning?
Well, I mean, we have a rural mentality. Is where we've come from. Our history has come from. So, that naturally doesn't lend itself to people being close together. No. So I think that's part of it, is that we need zoning ordinances that allow for higher density and more mixed use, and people being closer together and having different uses being able to be built near each other. And there needs to be areas that are zoned for rural green space, agriculture, but not in metro areas. I mean, we've got areas in the middle of Florence that are, zoned for agricultural use, and
somebody could put a hog pen or a chicken coop or something.
Yeah. And, I mean, it takes a little sacrifice from some politicians who have to approve things to be willing to see far enough down the road to be willing to make that change. And, that's where it's going to end up with the rubber meeting the road there, is with the politicians at the end of the day who have to approve the zoning change. And I think they're starting to do that, and they're starting to see that. I think we're putting our toes in the water a little bit in Florence and starting to do that some, but it's controversial, and you're going to step on people's toes, and it won't be easy.
I think it's one of those things, the sooner you do it, the sooner we get a plan in place and let everybody know what the plan is.
Who needs to be at the table, John, when we address these issues? Is it county, city government? Is it the mayor? Is it our local development? Who needs to be in the room when we begin creating a visionary plan of how to move forward?
Everybody you just said, economic development plan leaders. We need to have town hall meetings. I know that's a whole thing to say, but I think the public needs to have their voice heard, and but then we have to take that information and as a people and figure out what's the best for everybody long term. And so you can plan. Like, I don't want to buy. I'm looking for some farmland right now for myself, and I don't want to buy it knowing in a week they could change the zoning on it, and I've got a plant coming next to me. That's not why I bought it to begin with. So even I think future planning, if there's zoning in place and somebody has to go get a variance, is a lot better than having a complete unzoned property.
And that's why industry, if they come, they won't buy unzoned property. They want it to be zoned because they want the certainty of knowing what's allowed, and that they're not going to be opposed because somebody next door doesn't like what they're doing.
This also protects the individual who buys 30 acres, build a house, and then they had all this woods around them. They think that all this wood's going to stay that way. The next thing you know, you got a FedEx. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't use a name brand, but you got a distribution center. Sure. I'm just making that up.
They got to do their thing just like you got to do yours.
So, I mean, it's, if you know it, it helps everybody.
Ken, when you look at obviously the coast has grown as fast as, I read the other day, there are 3 zip codes in South Carolina that are in the top 9 fastest growing zip codes in all of America. They're all along the coast. He was talking about Greenville, but right now, are we primed and ready for backfill growth? I'm thinking about commercial property. I doubt coastal property highest best use is commercial. So are we beginning to think about accommodating all the population growth along the coast, but us being kind of the commercial hub to service all of that growth along the coast? Ain't nobody building a FedEx hub on the beach. No. The land's too valuable. But are we processing and thinking in a thoughtful way about that?
I don't think we're ever doing enough to be ready for that.
Why?
One, because most times we're not willing to spend the money to in advance to do things. You do it after the fact, and that's not the best way, and it costs more money. But that's usually what happens, and you don't know what to expect. You don't believe it until you see it.
But isn't it? I don't want to say too late, but hadn't we been more reactionary than proactive? We've reacted to these things that have happened instead of preparing. I'm not asking you to be critical of anybody. We're in this thing together. You're in it. We're all in this thing together trying to get better. And there's one thing for sure, and I'm going to be real Pamplicoinian for a second. They ain't going to quit coming. The next 10 years will be as fast a growing 10 years as the past 10 years has been in South Carolina. And I just question whether or not we're being visionary enough in addressing some of these concerns.
And part of it, I think, is that to make those improvements, you got to spend money. And so to spend the money, you got to raise taxes. And nobody wants to do that. You know that. And so the only way to do it is wait for the people to get here that it's going to naturally, increase the tax base, and then you got some money to throw towards it, but not enough. So nobody wants to pull the trigger and raise taxes to pay for the kind of visionary things that we need to do.
John, let's stay in that lane for a second. I've gotten to know you a little bit. I am in the business of government skepticism. I traffic in that. Ken's talking about nobody wants to do this and everybody's concerned about that. I would argue we live in my lifetime an era where people are most skeptical of government as they've ever been. I don't want to go into presidential politics or Democrats versus Republicans, but the general public are very skeptical about whether government's shooting them straight or not. Yep. How do we restore some of that?
That's something the politicians.
But doesn't it help for the government, for the people to trust their government when you go and ask, as Ken said, for a tax increase or a zoning and planning?
That's what I'm about to get to. I think that's up to the politicians to put people in place when they go to these offices that can answer a question about zoning, can answer why can't they get this permit in an intelligent way. It's how we how we put people in place, all levels of government that can actually do the job correctly. And that's why I say it's up to them. We have to get, not just talking about Florence, not criticizing Florence, but it's everywhere. But we got to have people that can understand why they're saying no to you or saying yes and saying yes to the neighbor, and explain to that person why. That's where we have to, that's where we start getting, I think, belief back in politicians. And also we as people have a responsibility to hold the politicians to their word that we have not done. And we go, oh, that's our guy, that's our team. We'll forgive him.
I don't like him, but I like him.
Yeah, exactly. That's Clemson, Carolina. Basically, politics have become Clemson, Carolina. And so it's up to both. And that's not really a great answer to your question.
It's the right answer. Yeah. And Ken, to that point, we can't get where we need to get and make sure we don't miss the boat on this growth without government being involved. And you know me, I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to that, but we can't get there if we don't have government involved.
Well, why don't you bring that up in the morning and see how? What kind of response?
I beat up on Governor in the morning. Now I'm doing something a little bit different here.
I tell you what we could start doing on it, and it wouldn't cost that much money compared to what we throw money away at. We can just, and I'm talking this region, we can look at what Summerville did and did not do correctly. If you don't think Summerville hadn't exploded over the last decade, why can't we put a group together to at least examine how they handle growth? I mean, we can do those things without spending a lot of money.
So wouldn't it make sense for us to put together a team, a PD regional team that includes PLC commercial, and go to Summerville and say, hey, guys, you got a minute? What did you do that you wish you hadn't done? What didn't you do that you wish you did? I mean, to me, that's a great idea. Don't make the mistake. Learn from the mistakes or the right moves that they made.
Well, you got to have visionary people, and you got to have people who are willing to ask other people for advice. And, that's what we need.
So Ken, I'll stay with you on this one. What are you most bullish about in this area, and what are you most bearish? I mean, in other words, what do you feel really good about where PLC commercial is in regards to development and economic development and property acquisition? And then what I don't say what keeps you up at night, but what concerns you, and what do you think we need to be paying specific attention to?
Well, I think there's a lot of development potential out there.
A lot of inquiries.
There's some demand that is not being met. And part of it is because the cost of doing construction, the building, the interest rates make it very difficult to do. So I think when the interest rates come down, you're going to see, a lot more activity.
People pull the trigger?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there are a lot of service-related QSRs, that are ready to come to Florence, and their spaces aren't available. And it's just hard to build new stuff and make the numbers work.
So, to their point, I mean, today the Federal Reserve basically came out and said there's going to be interest rate cuts. I mean, it's going to happen probably next meeting. We don't know the number. That's what he said today. It did happen today, but so why aren't we planning for this? If we know buildings are going to come up, why aren't we getting zoning ready? Why aren't we getting our staff locally ready to handle these kind of permitting questions? Why aren't we getting, engineers already? Hey, what's really needed to put this building in compared to this other building? Why do we still have water problems in the city of Florence? Why are these things that we're going to have to address to people? Why aren't we going and getting answers to those questions?
When you're in the middle of having 8.5%, prime rate, it's hard to think that way. But real estate cycles are going to change, and it's going to come back down. So, it speaks to your statement. I mean, we got to get ready because it's coming. We don't know if it's going to be 2 years or 3 years or how long it's going to be.
Sure. I mean, and I'm afraid that we're going to be as ill prepared for the next 10 years as we've been the last 10 years. And I for the betterment of my community and the area that I call home and the state in general, I want to be a part of kind of driving that debate to being more prepared for when interest rates go down. I do think that's a very big part of this. I don't want to ask you this. Where is the most activity? Is it in a certain sector of the economy, warehouse space, industry, office, business? Where are you guys seeing?
I thought you were talking about Buc-ee's. I'm sorry.
Yeah, activities. If you go to Buc-ee's, you don't have to ask any questions. I mean, you see it with your own eyes.
Yeah.
It's a NASCAR race meets a concert meets an SEC tailgate. I mean, that's what it is every single day of the week. But no, to the two of you, where do you see the most activity? And if interest rates go down, where do you think we'll really see some positive things happen?
I mean, we're seeing a lot of activity in the retail space, small service-related businesses, smaller spaces. The bigger stuff is slower.
I think to make all that work in this economy we've built over the last few years, distribution is still a big issue, and we can take advantage of it here with 95, and that's rezoning land, getting land. And one of my concerns, or you asked Ken what it is, some of mine are some of the people in private and non-private people that own so much land that don't want to do anything with it. That's a concern for me. How do we get them on board with saying, hey, you've land banked all this land. That's great. We appreciate you doing this. How can we now use this land to benefit this area?
Are they resistant to that, John, or just don't understand it?
I wouldn't want to speak for them. It seems to me that they're just not That's not their mentality at this point. But it could mean it couldn't change. I don't know why that's not their mentality.
And a lot of users just don't want a land lease.
They do not want a land
It
lease.
makes it complicated for your financing, and it's just very.
They either want to be a tenant or they want to be an owner. It's one of the two.
Last thing I want to touch on. How important, because I grew up not believing this, and I guess I'm a tree-hugging Republican now, but how important is the aesthetics of a community, the enhancement of quality of life? I sound like I'm running for office now, trying to get some of the green vote. But I mean, I've evolved. I mean, I do believe now that dedicated green space and trees and the beautification of a community makes PLC commercial more likely to succeed when we're competing against a city in North Carolina or a city in Georgia.
Absolutely. When you have parts of major corridors that just look abandoned and terrible, it's hard to get people where they need to get to see there is a nice place to live.
They see what they see, don't they, John?
That first impression is always the first impression, no matter what. And then you're working from behind that, and it does matter. And I think it matters to the people that live here. I mean, you made the comment that stuck with me last time when you would come back in from being in the coast, and you look here and you get depressed because it hasn't gotten better since we were kids. I mean, there was parts of this town that were really beautiful when I was growing up that aren't anymore.
Well, a lot of jobs, people can live anywhere, and quality of life is the decision maker on where they're going to end up. And, it's imperative, I think.
We can't build an ocean. We can't do all that kind of stuff. We can sure make where they live nice.
And keep what we got clean.
Are we as bad at that as it looks? I mean, I guess this is the podcast of criticism today.
I think when you live somewhere, you look at it a little harsher and through different lens than when you go somewhere else. You go into another town, you're not looking and seeing every piece of trash on the ground. So it's probably some of that.
Is the resistance, John, that it doesn't hit the bottom line? I mean, there's no dollar cost averaging here. There's no NOI in here. I mean, it's the trees look beautiful and the roads are very newly and freshly paved, but it doesn't really. I think it does impact the bottom line, but it's in the abstract.
Yes, it's a global understanding of how you get people's lives better, and they don't have it. That, right? We hadn't had it. I mean, me too. We hadn't had it. I mean, if you came to me 10 years ago and said, I'm going to put a bond to put the telephone poles on Irby Street, and I said, you're the craziest person in the world. I'm not voting for that. Now I'm giving it some consideration. Now, if we're doing that construction, can we fix the pipes? How do we get the pipes fixed? How do we get the drainage fixed? And while we're doing this, how can we fix this? And that's the way I look at it now. How do we take advantage of all the opportunities out there?
Should beautification of the interstate exit ramps be a part of that? Should we enhance and improve some of the egress and ingress off the interstate into Florence County?
It's always a good idea to have a pretty front door.
Yep. I mean, going back to my example about the roads, look, next time you go to North Carolina, look like when you switch over to the nice pavement. Look like when you go in Georgia. Look at what it looks like when you switch over to the nicer pavement. I mean, just take a look around.
It's night and day. And we got to confess that. I mean, we're not throw rocks at one another and blame one another.
Everybody lives in the state. Everybody goes to the state is aware of it.
I don't really get it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's a DOT issue or nobody wants to take responsibility for it. But I mean, it's like your focal point.
Ken, I'm telling you, and I'm a political theorist to some degree. I think it's a state of mind. Yeah. I think we've got to reset ourselves and understand this isn't your grandfather's South Carolina. It doesn't matter what you want it to be. It's going to be one of the top 20 populated states in America with one of the top 20 GDPs in America, whether we say it will be or not. And we've got to change that state of mind and adapt.
I think if we keep talking about it and keep it in front of people, things will start happening.
Last question. I said that was the last one. This is the last one. Affordability. Is construction more affordable, less affordable? What do we see in the future when it comes to someone who may be interested in buying a piece of property and building a business, but they come back to you and say, hey, man, I mean, I estimated $1 million. It's going to cost $1.6 million. I just can't do that. Where are we in that?
In the last 4 years, significant growth of the cost of doing business.
Is it pricing people out of the economy?
Yes.
What is the solution? Anybody got any? I mean, you don't have a magic wand. I don't have one. But to make things more affordable is how you generate business activity. Ken, you've been doing this a long time. I mean, any opinion or ideas?
I think the interest rates coming down is the easiest,
financing $1 million at 4% is better than financing $1 million at 8%.
I think you've seen a slowdown in residential building across the country, so materials are going to come down. That's going to help. Getting our engineers in our counties and our cities and lines so they don't have to over-engineer property is going to help. We need to do that. That's what we can do. I think that's the only thing we can do locally. I've been a part of some properties that the engineering costs came in and it just killed it. Like,
And having zoning in place for higher density.
yeah, you don't have to wait. It's just those are the things we can do. I think that's what you're asking. What can we do?
Sure.
And those are the things to get zoning and taking place and get with our local communities leaders and get some of these problems.
You guys have always maintained or try to be a one-stop shop. I mean, you kind of touch all the bases in commercial real estate. You guys have a team, and there's different, I don't know, expertise or levels of expertise and personalities on the team. If somebody out there's
Just a good look.
well, that's obvious. But Ken, John, if someone is interested in buying a piece of property, selling a piece of property, better understanding a piece of property, what sort of service do you offer, and how do they get in touch and communicate? How does that partnership begin?
Well, we do brokerage, property management, development, and the easiest way for somebody to get started and to see what we do is to go to our website at plccommercial.com. You can look at what services we offer. You can look at all the properties that we have available. You can look at all the commercial properties that are available in the region. So it's really a one-source commercial website that is easy to navigate, and you can contact any of us through that website, and we'd be glad to communicate with you, meet with you, give you an evaluation of your property, and we're.
Or John, if you're looking for a piece of property.
Now, I ask you a question. Let me comment on this real quick because I want to give some props to my business partner, Ken. He's the one that pushed for the website to be inclusive of other people's properties that they have listed, not just ours. And I think it's been very successful. I just really think he has how Ken looks at the world. He just sees as a bigger picture than I do. I appreciate him doing that.
At least as old as dirt, he should be able to see the world. To some degree of clarity by now. But if someone has a raw piece of dirt, don't have a clue what to do with it. You're in the business of trying to help them better understand it.
Absolutely. We're dealing with some folks out of Atlanta right now, some property that they have here. Just call us. We'll walk through the process of evaluating it. I'll tell you what we think it's worth, tell you what we think the best and highest uses for that property is going to be, and hopefully give you some kind of time frame that we can, how long it's going to sit there, what price, and you can decide what's best for you at that point. And we'll be your advocate from that point.
Okay. Thanks to both of you.
Good.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Before we go, public school starts school. I don't know if this is going to air tomorrow. Let's all tonight say a little prayer for everybody.
Good deal.
Especially Dad.
Yeah, you're right. Good deal. Thank you.